The afternoon sun blazed down on Oakwood Hills, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the city. $1 million houses lined the perfectly manicured streets, each one more impressive than the last. This was the kind of place where people drove luxury cars and belonged to exclusive country clubs. It was also the kind of place where a black woman driving alone would draw unwanted attention. General Patricia Williams had been driving through these same streets for 20 minutes, trying to find the Oakwood Country Club. She was already running late for the charity fundraiser she was hosting for military families. The GPS on her phone kept giving confusing directions, and she had taken 3 wrong turns already. Her black BMW sedan was immaculate, and she was dressed in an elegant navy blue dress with pearl earrings. Everything about her appearance spoke of success and refinement. Patricia had served her country for over 30 years. She had commanded troops in dangerous places, made life and death decisions that affected thousands of people, and earned the respect of world leaders. But today, she was just trying to get to a charity event without being late. As she turned onto Maple Street, her car started making a strange grinding noise. The engine began to sputter, and within seconds, steam was rising from under the hood. Patricia pulled over to the curb in front of a massive stone mansion with perfectly trimmed hedges. She turned off the engine and sat for a moment, taking a deep breath. This was not how she had planned to spend her afternoon. She stepped out of the car and walked around to the front. Even though she knew very little about car engines, she could tell something was seriously wrong. The hood was too hot to touch, and there was definitely some kind of fluid leaking onto the pristine street. She pulled out her phone to call for roadside assistance. That's when she noticed the police car. It was moving slowly down the street, and she could see the 2 officers inside looking directly at her. The car slowed down even more as it approached, and Patricia felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. She had experienced this feeling too many times before. That moment when she realized someone was judging her based on nothing more than the color of her skin. The police car pulled up behind her BMW, and both officers got out. The first one was a heavy-set man in his 40s with graying hair and small, suspicious eyes. His name tag read, Brennan. The second officer was younger, probably in his early 30s, with blonde hair and a cocky swagger. His badge said, Hayes. Patricia straightened her shoulders and put on her most professional smile. She had learned long ago that staying calm and polite was the best way to handle these situations, even when every instinct told her to be angry. "Good afternoon, officers," she said in her clear, authoritative voice. "I'm having some car trouble. Here, I was just about to call for assistance." Officer Brennan looked her up and down with obvious suspicion. His eyes moved from her face to her expensive dress, then to her jewelry, then to the luxury car behind her. She could practically see his mind working, trying to figure out how a black woman could afford such nice things. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Brennan asked, his voice already carrying an accusatory tone. Patricia kept her voice steady. "I'm on my way to an event at the Oakwood Country Club. My car broke down, as you can see," Officer Hayes snorted. "The country club, right? What kind of event?" "A charity fundraiser for military families," Patricia replied. She was starting to feel the first stirring of irritation, but she kept it out of her voice. "I'm one of the organizers." The 2 officers exchanged a look that Patricia recognized all too well. It was the look that said they didn't believe a word she was saying. "Can I see some identification?" Brennan demanded. Patricia nodded and reached for her purse, moving slowly and deliberately. She had learned to be careful about sudden movements around police officers, but as soon as her hand went toward her bag, Hayes stepped forward aggressively. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," he shouted. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Patricia froze, her hand halfway to her purse. "I'm just getting my ID like you asked." "Move slowly," Brennan ordered. "Real slowly." Patricia carefully opened her purse and pulled out her driver's license. She handed it to Brennan, who studied it with exaggerated intensity, as if he was looking for signs that it was fake. "Patricia Williams," he read aloud. "Says here you live on Washington Avenue. That's clear across town. What are you really doing over here?" "I told you I'm going to a charity event," Patricia said. Her voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath it now. I got lost trying to find the country club and then my car broke down. Hayes walked around her BMW, peering in the windows. This is a pretty expensive car for someone from Washington Avenue, he said. How can you afford a car like this? The question hit Patricia like a slap. She had bought that car with money she had earned through decades of military service, through putting her life on the line for her country, through working harder than most people could imagine. But she knew that explaining this would only make things worse. I work hard for my money, she said simply. Doing what? Brennan pressed. I'm in the military. Hayes laughed out loud. Military? You mean like the National Guard, weekend warrior stuff? Patricia felt her jaw tighten. She had commanded more soldiers than these two men had ever seen in their entire lives, but she couldn't say that without making them angry. I'm active duty, she said. Uh-huh, Brennan said, clearly not believing her. And what rank are you? This was the moment Patricia had been dreading. If she told them the truth, they would think she was lying and making fun of them. If she didn't tell them, they would continue to treat her like a criminal. I'm a general, she said quietly. Both officers burst out laughing. Hayes slapped his knee like he had just heard the funniest joke in the world. A general, he wheezed. Oh, that's rich, and I'm the President of the United States. Ma'am, Brennan said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, lying to police officers is a crime. Now, why don't you tell us what you're really doing in this neighborhood? Patricia felt her heart rate increase, but she kept her expression calm. I'm telling you the truth. I'm a 4-star general in the United States Army, and I'm trying to get to a charity event that I'm hosting. The laughter died on the officers, faces replaced by anger. They saw her calm authority not as evidence that she was telling the truth, but as disrespect for their authority. You think this is funny? Hayes demanded. You think you can make jokes about the military? I'm not making jokes, Patricia said. I'm telling you exactly who I am. Brennan stepped closer to her, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. Listen, lady, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it ends now. We've had reports of break-ins in this neighborhood, and you match the description of someone we're looking for. Patricia's heart sank. She knew where this was going, and she knew there was very little she could do to stop it. What description? She asked. Black female driving an expensive car acting suspicious, Hayes said with a smirk. The description was so vague it could apply to any black woman in the city, and Patricia knew it. This wasn't about preventing crime. This was about two officers who had decided she didn't belong in this neighborhood and were determined to prove it. Officers, she said, her voice still steady despite the fear growing inside her. I understand. You're doing your job. But I'm not the person you're looking for. If you could just let me call for a tow truck, I'll be out of your way in no time. But Brennan and Hayes had already made up their minds. They saw an expensive car, expensive clothes, and a black woman who spoke with confidence and authority. In their minds, that could only mean one thing. She was a criminal who had gotten her hands on things that didn't belong to her. The situation was about to get much worse. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Patricia could see that the two officers had already made their decision about her, and nothing she said was going to change their minds. She had been in enough dangerous situations during her military career to recognize when things were about to go very wrong. Officer Brennan was still holding her driver's license, studying it like he was looking for hidden secrets. His partner Hayes was walking around her car again, this time looking inside through the windows with his hands cupped against the glass. You know what I think? Brennan said, his voice taking on a nastier tone. I think you stole this car. I think you're driving around this neighborhood looking for houses to break into, and we caught you red-handed. Patricia felt her heart skip a beat, but she kept her voice level. Officer, that car is registered in my name. You can check the registration if you'd like. It's in the glove compartment. Oh, I'm sure you've got fake papers, Hayes called out from beside the car. These car thieves are getting pretty sophisticated these days. The accusations stung more than Patricia wanted to admit. She had spent her entire adult life serving her country with honor and integrity. She had been trusted with national secrets, commanded thousands of soldiers, and received medals for her service. Now she was being treated like a common criminal because two officers couldn't believe that a black woman could legitimately own nice things. "Officers, I understand you're doing your job," Patricia said, trying one more time to reason with them. "But I'm telling you the truth, I'm a general in the United States Army. I'm not a car thief and I'm not a burglar. I'm just trying to get to a charity event." Brennan's face turned red with anger. "Stop lying to us. You think we're stupid? You think we don't know what a real general looks like?" "And what does a real general look like?" Patricia asked quietly. The question hung in the air for a moment. Both officers knew they couldn't answer it honestly without revealing their own prejudices, but their silence spoke volumes. Hayes came back around to where they were standing. "She's got expensive stuff in that car too," he said to his partner. "Designer purse, fancy sunglasses, some kind of electronic tablet, probably all stolen." Patricia closed her eyes for a moment, trying to summon the patience she had learned through years of dealing with difficult situations. When she opened them, again her voice was firm but respectful. "Those items belong to me. The tablet is military-issued equipment that I use for work. If you'll allow me to make a phone call, I can have someone verify my identity." "A phone call to who?" Brennan demanded. "Your accomplices?" "To the Pentagon," Patricia said. Both officers burst out laughing again, but this time their laughter had an edge to it. They were getting frustrated with what they saw as her continued lies, and frustrated police officers were dangerous police officers. "The Pentagon." Hayes slapped his thigh. "Oh man, this just keeps getting better. Next, you're going to tell us you know the president personally." Patricia didn't respond to that, though the truth was, she had briefed 3 different presidents during her career. Instead, she tried a different approach. "Officers, there are people at the country club who are expecting me. If I don't show up soon, they're going to start looking for me. Why don't you call the club and ask them about the charity event? They can confirm I'm supposed to be there." Brennan shook his head. "Nice try, but we're not calling anybody based on your word. For all we know, you've got friends at that club who are in on whatever scam you're running." The situation was spiraling out of control, and Patricia knew it. She had dealt with hostile situations before, but those had been in war, zones where the rules of engagement were clear. Here, on an American street, she felt more vulnerable than she had ever felt in combat. That's when her phone started ringing. The sound came from inside her purse, which was still in her hand. All 3 of them looked down at it as the military ringtone played. Patricia recognized the number on the screen immediately. It was her aide calling from the Pentagon, probably wondering why she was late for the security briefing that was scheduled right after the charity event. "I need to answer that," Patricia said. "It's work." "Don't even think about it," Hayes snapped, stepping closer to her. "You're not making any phone calls." "This is an important call," Patricia insisted. "It's about national security." The officers looked at each other and started laughing again. To them, the idea that this black woman in front of them could have anything to do with national security was absurd. "National security," Brennan wheezed. "Lady, you are really something else." The phone kept ringing. Patricia knew that if she didn't answer, her aide would keep calling. And if she still didn't answer after several attempts, protocols would kick in. People would start looking for her. But she also knew that reaching for the phone without permission could give the officers an excuse to claim she was being aggressive or uncooperative. "Please," she said, "just let me answer the phone. You can listen to the conversation if you want. The only conversation you're going to have is with us," Hayes said. He reached out and grabbed the phone from her purse before she could stop him. "Hey," Patricia protested. "You can't take my phone." "Watch us," Brennan said. He took the phone from his partner and looked at the screen. The caller ID showed a number with a Washington, D.C. area code, but that didn't impress him. "Probably one of your criminal friends with a D.C. number to make it look official," he said as he declined the call. Patricia felt a surge of anger, unlike anything she had experienced in years. That phone contained classified information. It was a secure military device that unauthorized personnel were not supposed to touch, let alone confiscate. But she also knew that showing anger would only make things worse. That phone contains sensitive government information, she said, her voice tight with controlled fury. You don't have the authority to take it. We have the authority to do whatever we need to do to investigate a crime, Brennan replied. And right now you're our prime suspect. Suspect for what crime exactly? Patricia asked. Hayes pulled out his handcuffs. Suspicious activity, possible car theft, possible burglary, and now resisting arrest. I'm not resisting arrest, Patricia said, her voice rising slightly despite her efforts to stay calm. I haven't done anything wrong. You're arguing with us. You're refusing to cooperate, and you keep telling us ridiculous lies, Hayes said. That sounds like resisting to me. Patricia looked around desperately. A few people had gathered on the sidewalk and in front of the country club to watch what was happening. Some of them had their phones out, and she could see they were recording. She hoped that if this went badly, at least there would be evidence of what really happened. Turn around and put your hands behind your back, Brennan ordered. Patricia stared at him in disbelief. You're actually going to arrest me? For what? For all the things we just told you, Hayes said, moving behind her with the handcuffs ready. Now turn around before we have to make you turn around. Patricia knew she had reached the point of no return. She could comply and hope that someone would sort this mess out later, or she could continue to resist and risk the situation getting violent. She thought about her years of military service, about all the young soldiers who looked up to her, about the responsibility she carried as one of the highest-ranking officers in the Army. She turned around and put her hands behind her back. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked into place around her wrists, and Patricia felt something die inside her chest. She had been decorated for bravery in combat, had been trusted with some of the nation's most important secrets, had commanded respect from world leaders. Now she was standing on a street corner in handcuffs because two officers couldn't believe that she belonged in a nice neighborhood. You have the right to remain silent. Brennan began reading her Miranda rights in a bored voice, like he had done this 1,000 times before. As the words washed over her, Patricia looked up at the people who were watching and recording. She wondered what they were thinking. Did they see a criminal being justly arrested, or did they see an injustice taking place? Would anyone speak up for her, or would they just post the videos online and move on with their lives? The handcuffs were too tight, cutting into her wrists, but Patricia didn't complain. She had endured much worse during her military training. Instead, she held her head high and maintained her dignity, even as the two officers led her toward their patrol car like she was a common criminal. The charity event would have to go on without her. The security briefing at the Pentagon would have to be postponed. And somewhere in Washington, phones were probably starting to ring as people wondered where General Patricia Williams had disappeared to. The police station smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant. Patricia sat in the back of the patrol car for what felt like hours, her hands still cuffed behind her back, watching the officers laugh and joke as they filled out paperwork. The metal cuffs had rubbed her wrists raw, but she refused to let the discomfort show on her face. When they finally pulled her out of the car, Patricia's legs were stiff from sitting in the cramped back seat. She stumbled slightly as she stood up, and Officer Hayes grabbed her arm roughly. "Watch it," he said with a smirk. "Don't want you falling and claiming we hurt you." Patricia straightened herself and walked toward the station entrance with as much dignity as she could manage. Her expensive dress was wrinkled now, and one of her pearl earrings had fallen out somewhere during the arrest, but she kept her chin up and her shoulders back. She had learned long ago that in situations like this, how you carried yourself mattered more than what you said. The inside of the station was exactly what Patricia had expected. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, unflattering glow. The walls were painted an institutional green color that had probably been ugly when it was new and had only gotten worse with age. Police officers moved around with cups of coffee and stacks of paperwork, most of them barely glancing at the woman in handcuffs being led through their workspace. At the front desk sat a heavy-set sergeant with gray hair and tired eyes. His nameplate read Rodriguez, and he looked like he had been working at this station for decades. He glanced up from his computer as Brennan and Hayes approached with their prisoner. "What have we got here?" Rodriguez asked in a weary voice. Suspicious activity. In the Oakwood Hills area, Brennan replied, pulling out his notebook. Possible car theft, possible burglary, resisting arrest and lying to police officers. Rodriguez looked Patricia up and down, taking in her expensive clothes and jewelry. What's her story? She claims she's some kind of general in the army, Hayes said with a laugh. Says she was going to a charity event at the country club. A general? Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. That's a new one. Patricia finally spoke up. Because it's true. I am General Patricia Williams, and I was on my way to a charity fundraiser when my car broke down. The desk sergeant looked at her more, carefully this time. There was something about the way she spoke, the way she held herself despite being in handcuffs, that was different from most of the people who got brought into the station. But Rodriguez had been doing this job for 25 years and he had heard every story in the book. Right, he said, turning back to his computer. Let's get her processed. As they went through the booking procedure, Patricia remained silent. She gave them her name, address, and date of birth when asked, but she didn't try to explain her situation again. She had learned that sometimes the best strategy was to wait and let other people figure out their mistake. But as she sat in the processing area, Patricia couldn't help but listen to the conversations going on around her. And what she heard made her stomach turn. Another one from the fancy neighborhood, one officer said to another as he walked by. They're getting bolder, these people. What do you expect? His partner replied. They see all that money over there and think they deserve a piece of it. Patricia bit her tongue. She wanted to tell them that she had earned every dollar she had through decades of service to her country, through putting her life on the line in places they couldn't imagine. But she knew that speaking up would only make things worse for her. Near the back of the station, Detective Maria Santos was finishing up paperwork from her last case. She was a 15-year veteran of the force, one of only 3 Latina detectives in the department, and she had seen enough injustice to recognize it when it walked through the door. Something about the arrest Brennan and Hayes had made didn't sit right with her. She had worked with both officers before, and she knew they had a tendency to see criminals where there might not be any. Brennan especially had a history of complaints against him, though nothing had ever stuck. The department brass seemed to think he was just thorough in his police work. Santos walked over to where Patricia was sitting and introduced herself. Ma'am, I'm Detective Santos. I understand you've had a difficult evening. Patricia looked up at the detective and saw something she hadn't seen in the eyes of the other officers. Genuine concern. Yes, I have, she said quietly. Would you like to tell me what happened from your perspective? Santos asked, pulling up a chair. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, Patricia felt like someone might actually listen to her. She told the detective about getting lost on her way to the charity event, about her car breaking down, about the officers assuming she was a criminal simply because she was black and driving a nice car. Santos listened without interrupting, taking notes in a small notebook. When Patricia mentioned that she was a 4-star general, the detective's pen stopped moving for just a moment, but she didn't laugh or roll her eyes like the other officers had. Ma'am, Santos said carefully, if what you're telling me is true, this is a very serious situation. Do you have any way to prove your identity? My military ID is in my purse, Patricia replied, but the officers took my purse and my phone. They wouldn't let me make any calls. Santos frowned. Taking someone's phone and preventing them from making calls was supposed to be done only under specific circumstances, and she wasn't sure those circumstances applied here. What kind of calls were you trying to make? I have a secure line to the Pentagon. My aide was calling about a security briefing I'm supposed to attend tomorrow morning. When I didn't answer, they're going to start looking for me. The detective felt a chill run down her spine. If this woman was telling the truth, if she really was a high-ranking military officer, then Brennan and Hayes had just created a problem that would reach all the way to Washington, D.C. Let me see what I can do, Santos said, standing up from her chair. She walked over to the evidence locker where Patricia's belongings had been stored. The purse was expensive leather, and inside she found a wallet with credit cards, a military ID card, and several other forms of identification. All of them had Patricia Williams' name and photo, and all of them looked completely legitimate. But it was the military ID that made Santos's heart start beating faster. The card showed Patricia's rank as a 4-star general, one of the highest ranks in the U.S. military. If this was fake, it was the best fake ID Santos had ever seen. And if it was real, Santos took the ID card to her computer and accessed the military personnel database that the police department had limited access to. When she typed in Patricia's name and service number, the screen flashed a message that made her blood run cold. Classified. Clearance level insufficient. The detective stared at the screen for a long moment. In all her years of police work, she had never seen a message like that. It meant that Patricia Williams's military record was so highly classified that even law enforcement couldn't access it without special authorization. Santos looked across the station to where Patricia was, still sitting in handcuffs, maintaining her dignity despite everything that had happened to her. Then she looked at Brennan and Hayes, who were still joking around near the coffee machine, completely unaware of what they had done. The detective picked up her phone and dialed the number for military personnel verification. It was after hours, but she knew someone would answer. Someone always answered when it came to matters of national security. "This is Detective Santos with the Metro Police Department," she said when someone picked up. "I need to verify the identity of someone who claims to be a 4-star general. Her name is Patricia Williams." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Can you hold, please, detective?" Santos waited, her heart pounding. Across the station, she could see that Patricia was watching her, probably wondering what was happening. The detective gave her a small nod, trying to convey that help was on the way. After what felt like forever, a different voice came on the line. This one sounded more senior, more official. "Detective Santos, this is Colonel Thompson from the Pentagon. Did you say you have General Patricia Williams in custody?" The word custody hit Santos like a punch to the stomach. "Yes, sir. She was arrested earlier this evening on suspicion of, well, there seems to have been a misunderstanding." "Detective," the colonel's voice was ice cold. "General Williams is one of the most important military officers in this country. She has security clearance that goes all the way to the top. If she's being held against her will, you need to release her immediately." Santos felt the world tilt around her. "Sir, I'll take care of this right away." "You'd better," the colonel replied, "because in about 10 minutes I'm going to start making phone calls. And those calls are going to go all the way up to people who are not going to be happy about this situation." The line went dead, and Santos stared at the phone in her hand. She looked across the station at Brennan and Hayes, who were still laughing about something, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit them. Then she looked at Patricia, who was sitting quietly with her hands still cuffed behind her back, and Santos realized that this night was about to become one that nobody at the police station would ever forget. Detective Santos hung up the phone and felt her hands shaking. In 15 years of police work, she had never been in a situation like this. She looked across the station at Patricia, who was still sitting calmly despite being handcuffed for over 2 hours. The woman's composure was remarkable, but Santos could see the exhaustion starting to show around her eyes. The detective walked quickly to the evidence locker and grabbed Patricia's purse and phone. Her mind was racing as she tried to figure out how to handle what was about to become the biggest crisis in the department's history. As she walked back toward Patricia, Santos noticed that the station had gotten quieter. It was almost 9 o'clock at night, and the day shift was getting ready to go home. Most of the officers were finishing up their paperwork and looking forward to getting out of there. They had no idea that their quiet evening was about to explode. "Ma'am," Santos said softly as she approached Patricia, "I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Patricia looked up at the detective. "I've been honest with everyone all evening. No one wanted to listen." "I'm listening now," Santos replied. "The phone call you were expecting from the Pentagon, how important was it?" Patricia's expression grew serious. "I'm supposed to attend a security briefing tomorrow morning about ongoing operations in 3 different countries. When I don't show up and they can't reach me, people are going to start asking questions." Santos felt her stomach drop. "What kind of people?" The kind of people who have the authority to shut down this entire police department if they think, "I'm being held against my will," Patricia said quietly. Before Santos could respond, Patricia's phone started ringing again. The detective looked at the screen and saw the same Washington, D.C. number that had been calling earlier. This time, Santos answered it herself. "Hello? Who is this?" a stern male voice demanded. "Where is General Williams?" "This is Detective Santos with the Metro Police Department. General Williams is... She's here at the station." "Is she under arrest?" Santos hesitated. "There's been a misunderstanding. We're working to resolve it now. Put her on the phone. Now." Santos looked at Patricia, who nodded. The detective held the phone to Patricia's ear since her hands were still cuffed behind her back. "This is General Williams," Patricia said. "General, this is Colonel Thompson. Are you all right? We've been trying to reach you for hours." "I'm fine, Colonel. My car broke down and there was some confusion about my identity. Detective Santos is helping to sort it out. Ma'am, we have 3 different agencies asking about your location. The Secretary of Defense wants a personal briefing on this situation. How soon can you be released?" Patricia looked at Detective Santos, who was listening to every word. "I hope very soon, Colonel. Ma'am, I'm sending a team from the base to escort you back to Washington. They should be there within the hour." Santos took the phone back, her hands trembling. "Colonel, this is Detective Santos again. Did you say the Secretary of Defense?" "Detective General Williams is one of the most important military officers in this country. She has been missing for over 3 hours with no explanation. Do you understand the seriousness of this situation?" Santos understood perfectly. She also understood that her career might be over before the night was through. "Yes, sir. I understand. Completely. Good. Because if anything happens to General Williams while she's in your custody, you're going to have to explain it to people a lot more important than me." The line went dead, and Santos stared at the phone. Around the station, she could see other officers starting to notice that something was wrong. Her conversation had been loud enough for several people to hear, and word was starting to spread. Captain Rodriguez, the station commander, emerged from his office looking confused and annoyed. He was a short, stocky man in his 50s who had been running the station for 8 years. He prided himself on keeping things calm and orderly, and he could sense that his orderly evening was about to fall apart. "Santos, what's going on out here?" he demanded. The detective walked over to her commander, trying to figure out how to explain the situation without causing a complete panic. "Captain, we have a problem. A big problem." "What kind of problem?" Santos glanced back at Patricia, then lowered her voice. "The woman that Brennan and Hayes arrested tonight, she really is a 4-star general." Captain Rodriguez stared at her for a moment, then started laughing. "Come on, Santos, don't tell me you're falling for that story too." "Captain, I called the Pentagon. I verified her identity. She's the real deal." The laughter died on Rodriguez's face. "What do you mean you verified her identity?" "I mean she's General Patricia Williams, 4-star general in the United States Army, and she's been sitting in our station in handcuffs for the past 2 hours because Brennan and Hayes thought she was a car thief." Rodriguez felt the blood drain from his face. He had been a police officer for 27 years and he had seen a lot of mistakes, but nothing like this. "Are you absolutely sure?" "The Pentagon is sending a team to escort her back to Washington. The Secretary of Defense wants a personal briefing on what happened here tonight." Captain Rodriguez looked across the station at Patricia, who was still sitting quietly in the same chair where she had been for hours. Even from a distance, he could see something in her posture that he should have noticed earlier. She wasn't sitting like someone who was afraid or angry. She was sitting like someone who was used to being in command, someone who was simply waiting for other people to figure out their mistake. "Oh God," Rodriguez whispered. "This is going to destroy us." Santos nodded grimly. "It gets worse, Captain. Her phone has been ringing all evening with calls from the Pentagon. She was supposed to attend a security briefing tomorrow morning. People have been looking for her." Rodriguez felt like he was going to be sick. He thought about his pension, about his family, about the reputation of the police department. All of it was about to go up in smoke because two of his officers couldn't believe that a black woman could legitimately own a nice car. Across the station, Officers Brennan and Hayes were still joking around near the coffee machine, completely oblivious to the disaster they had created. Rodriguez watched them laughing and felt anger building in his chest. "Where are Brennan and Hayes?" he asked. "Over by the break room," Santos replied. Rodriguez marched across the station with Santos following behind him. When he reached the two officers, his face was red with fury. "Brennan, Hayes, in my office. Now!" Both officers looked surprised by their captain's tone, but they followed him to his office without asking questions. Rodriguez slammed the door behind them and turned to face the two men who had just ended their careers. "Do you two idiots have any idea what you've done?" he shouted. Brennan looked confused. "What are you talking about, Captain?" "That woman you arrested tonight. She really is a 4-star general." Hayes started to laugh. "Come on, Captain. You don't believe that story, do you?" Rodriguez grabbed a printout from his desk and shoved it in Hayes' face. It was Patricia's military record, or at least the parts that weren't classified. "Does this look like a story to you?" Both officers stared at the paper in shock. There was Patricia's photo, her name, her rank, and a list of commendations and medals that took up half the page. "This can't be real," Brennan whispered. "It's real," Rodriguez said. "And in about 20 minutes, there are going to be military personnel here to escort General Williams back to Washington. And tomorrow morning I'm going to have to explain to the mayor, the police commissioner, and probably the FBI why two of my officers arrested one of the most important military officers in the country." Hayes sat down heavily in a chair, his face pale. "We didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't want to know," Rodriguez shouted. "You saw a black woman in an expensive car and decided she had to be a criminal. You didn't listen to her. You didn't check her story, and you didn't treat her with basic human decency." Brennan tried to defend himself. "Captain, she matched the description of someone we were looking for." "What description? Black female driving an expensive car? Do you know how many people that describes? Do you know how racist that sounds?" Both officers sat in silence, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of their mistake. Outside the captain's office, Detective Santos was gently removing the handcuffs from Patricia's wrists. The metal had left red marks on her skin, and Santos felt sick looking at them. "Ma'am, I am so sorry about this," Santos said softly. Patricia rubbed her wrists and stretched her arms for the first time in hours. "Detective, this isn't your fault. You're the only person here who treated me with respect. Still, this should never have happened. Not to you, not to anyone." Patricia stood up slowly, her muscles stiff from sitting in the same position for so long. "Detective, I've been in the military for over 30 years. I've served in combat zones where people were trying to kill me. But I've never felt as powerless as I felt tonight, sitting in that chair, knowing that nothing I said would make any difference because two officers had already decided who I was based on the color of my skin." Santos felt tears forming in her eyes. "Ma'am, I promise you this is going to change things. This can't happen again." Patricia looked around the police station. The military vehicles that pulled into the police station parking lot weren't ordinary cars. They were black SUVs with tinted windows and government license plates, the kind that made people stop and stare. As soon as they parked, 4 soldiers in dress uniforms stepped out, moving with the kind of precision that came from years of military training. Inside the station, every conversation stopped. Officers who had been joking around moments earlier suddenly found themselves standing, at attention without even realizing it. There was something about the presence of these military personnel that commanded instant respect. The lead soldier, a colonel with silver hair and steel-gray eyes, walked straight to the front desk. His uniform was perfectly pressed, and his chest was covered with ribbons and medals that spoke of years of distinguished service. "I'm Colonel Thompson," he said to Detective Santos, who had come forward to meet him. "I'm here for General Williams." Santos gestured toward Patricia, who was sitting quietly in the same chair where she had spent most of the evening. Even after Everything she had been through, Patricia looked composed and dignified. When she saw Colonel Thompson, she stood up and straightened her shoulders. "General," the colonel said with obvious relief in his voice. "Are you all right, ma'am?" "I'm fine, Colonel," Patricia replied. "Thank you for coming." Thompson looked around the police station, taking in the scene. He could see the embarrassment and fear on the faces of the officers, and he could see the red marks on Patricia's wrists where the handcuffs had been. His jaw tightened with controlled anger. "General, we have a car waiting to take you back to Washington. The Secretary of Defense is expecting a full report on this incident." Patricia nodded, but before she left, she turned to Detective Santos. "Detective, I want to thank you for treating me with dignity tonight. You listened when no one else would." Santos felt tears in her eyes again. "Ma'am, I just did what was right." "That's more than most people did tonight," Patricia replied. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "If you ever decide you want to work for an organization that values integrity and character, give me a call." As Patricia and the military escort prepared to leave, Captain Rodriguez approached nervously. He had spent the last hour on the phone, with the mayor, the police commissioner, and his own superiors, trying to explain how his officers had arrested a 4-star general. None of those conversations had gone well. "General Williams," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "on behalf of the entire department, I want to apologize for what happened tonight. This is not how we train our officers to behave." Patricia looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. "Captain, your apology is noted, but what matters now is what you do to make sure this never happens again." "Yes, ma'am. We're already implementing new training programs and reviewing our procedures." Patricia's expression didn't change. "Captain, I've heard those promises before. The question is whether you mean them this time." Before Rodriguez could respond, Patricia walked toward the exit with her military escort. As she reached the door, she turned back to look at the police station one last time. Every officer in the building was watching her, and she could see shame in many of their faces. 3 days later, Patricia stood at a podium in front of the Pentagon, facing a room full of reporters and cameras. She had spent those 3 days thinking carefully about what she wanted to say. She could have demanded that the officers be fired. She could have sued the police department. She could have used her influence to destroy the careers of everyone involved. Instead, she chose a different path. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and strong. 3 nights ago, I experienced something that happens to Black Americans every single day in this country. I was treated as guilty until proven innocent, not because of anything I had done, but because of assumptions about who I am based on the color of my skin. The room was completely silent. Patricia could see reporters leaning forward, hanging on every word. "I want to be clear about something," she continued. "This didn't happen to me because I was a general. It happened to me because I was a Black woman driving a nice car in a wealthy neighborhood. The only difference between my experience and the experiences of thousands of other Black Americans is that I had the resources and connections to prove my innocence." Patricia paused, letting her words sink in. "But what about the people who don't have those resources? What about the single mothers, the students, the working people who find themselves in the same situation but don't have a direct line to the Pentagon?" The questions from reporters came fast and hard. How did she feel about the officers involved? Was she going to sue? What did she want to happen to the police department? Patricia answered each question with the same measured tone she used in military briefings. "Officer Brennan has been suspended pending a full investigation. Officer Hayes is undergoing mandatory training on bias and proper police procedures. But more importantly, the entire department is implementing new policies to prevent this from happening again." One reporter raised her hand. "General, some people are saying you're being too easy on the officers who arrested you. What do you say to that?" Patricia looked directly into the camera. "I could destroy those men's careers with a phone call, but that wouldn't change anything. What will change things is if we use this incident as a teaching moment. What will change things is if police departments across the country look at what happened to me and ask themselves how they can do better." After the press conference, Patricia returned to the police station where it all began. But this time she wasn't coming as a suspect. She was coming as a partner. Detective Santos met her at the door, looking surprised. "General, I didn't expect to see you here again. Detective, I told you I believe in second chances. I'm here to help make sure your department gets this one right." Over the next several months, Patricia worked closely with the police department to develop new training programs. She spoke to officers about unconscious bias, about the importance of listening to people instead of making assumptions, and about treating every person with dignity regardless of their race or social status. The training wasn't easy. Some officers resisted, claiming they weren't racist and didn't need to be lectured, but others, including Detective Santos, embraced the opportunity to learn and grow. Officer Hayes was one of the officers who took the training seriously. He had spent sleepless nights thinking about what he had done, about how his assumptions had led him to treat an innocent woman like a criminal. When Patricia spoke to his training class, he raised his hand. "General, how do you forgive someone who treated you the way we treated you that night?" Patricia looked at him thoughtfully. "Officer Hayes, forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about choosing to work together to make sure it doesn't happen again. You can't change what you did that night, but you can change how you treat people going forward." Officer Brennan never returned to the force. The investigation revealed a pattern of complaints and questionable arrests that the department had ignored for too long. He was quietly asked to resign, and he disappeared from public view. But the real change came in the day-to-day interactions between police and the community. Officers started taking more time to listen to people's explanations. They started checking IDs more carefully before making assumptions. They started treating traffic stops and investigations as conversations between human beings rather than confrontations between cops and potential criminals. 6 months after the incident, Patricia received a letter from a young black woman named Keisha, who lived in the same neighborhood where Patricia had been arrested. Keisha wrote that she had been pulled over by police the week before, but instead of being treated with suspicion, the officer had been polite and professional. He had listened to her explanation, checked her registration carefully, and sent her on her way with a friendly reminder to get her taillight fixed. "I don't know if this would have happened before your arrest," Keisha wrote, "but I wanted you to know that things are getting better. Thank you for turning something terrible into something that helped all of us." Patricia kept that letter on her desk at the Pentagon, next to her military commendations and photos with world leaders. It reminded her that sometimes the most important battles weren't fought with weapons or in foreign countries. Sometimes they were fought in police stations and community centers, one conversation at a time. The incident also led to changes beyond that single police department. Patricia was invited to speak at police academies across the country, sharing her story and helping to train the next generation of officers. She worked with civil rights organizations to develop better policies for handling complaints of racial bias. Most importantly, Patricia used her experience to bridge the gap between the military and civilian communities. She organized events where veterans and police officers could share their experiences and learn from each other. She helped create mentorship programs that paired young black students with positive role models in law enforcement. Years later, when people asked Patricia about that night in the police station, she always gave the same answer. "It was one of the worst experiences of my life, but it led to some of the most important work I've ever done."